Welcome back. Well, as job vacancies hit a record this past spring, the question was how businesses could attract workers. Economists have one answer they think is worth pursuing: entice some of the older workers who've transitioned out of the labor force back to work. Jean-Francois Perrault is chief economist at Scotiabank. He's done some research on this subject. JF, great to have you with us.
Thank you. Great to be on.
So let's first kind of characterize what we're talking about. I think we know during pandemic that people who are kind of on the edge of retirement may have gone sooner. What's the available pool, do we figure, of older workers that are on that kind of cusp that could be brought back?
Well, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of workers, right? Possibly more than 1 million. And it really is kind of this untapped, well, it's not untapped, it's a no longer tapped pool of worker, which, we as businesses and policymakers and individuals have invested heavily in over the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years of their career. So it is, it's a question that begs some serious thinking, given our labor shortages, given the need for workers, given the need for experienced, qualified workers. Why aren't we thinking about older Canadians more seriously in terms of a partial solution to our job challenge?
And when we do think about that, as you say, in many cases, certainly in the knowledge worker industries, a lot of investment, experience, time that's been put into those workers has gone out the door. Bringing them back seems like an obvious first choice. Are there some hurdles to that, including, how work is changing? There's more technology involved. Might businesses actually need to focus less on Gen Z and what they require, which we'll be talking about later, and maybe a little bit more on how to accommodate an older worker?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's a range of hurdles. Obviously, part of it is, the retirement income system, which is geared towards 65 and incentives around that. The other is, of course, businesses can perhaps find ways of making sure that older workers feel less of a need to exit, at the right time. But there's also, the reality of it, which is especially true over the last number of years, is, wealth has increased a lot for Canadians, even through the pandemic. And of course, older Canadians are wealthier than younger Canadians. So it could very well be that we've entered this period where, just financially, older Canadians have decided, listen, I've accumulated enough wealth. I can retire comfortably. My house is worth a lot more than I thought it was going to be. I'm out. And that's a much more tricky, policy issue.
100%.
Older workers, right?
Is there maybe a silver lining? I hate to put it that way, Jeff, but if there is a recession, does it persuade some of those people that they're not as wealthy as they think, just to borrow Scotiabank's motto for a minute and twist it, that we get people back into the labor force, whether they're young or old, because a recession reminds them that, some of their wealth is on paper and it may not be as solid as they thought?
Absolutely. I think it works in two different ways. One is obviously there's been a reduction in home prices. There'll probably be a little bit more of a reduction. There's been a reduction in equity value, so a shocked portfolio. So people are less wealthy now than they were a few months ago. But also there's the inflation aspect of it, which is, inflation is incredibly high in Canada. It's eroding purchasing power. You are not as wealthy as you thought you were, whether you're looking at it from a balance sheet perspective or your ability to buy things relative to a few months ago. So those two things, in our mind, are likely to compel some folks to go back into the labor market or perhaps delay retiring. But that, it remains to be seen whether that's a critical enough amount of people to make a difference in terms of the shortages we're looking at, or do we need more activist policies to try and, compel that to happen.
So good to have you with us. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much.
Jean-Francois Perrault is chief economist at Scotiabank. Well, even for businesses that already have workers on board, the demands made by employees are changing, and the younger they are, the more likely it is that they have new ideas about how work should look. Rather than see that as a problem, the way work and business life evolves could be an opportunity for the Canadian economy. Stephen Harrington is the Director of Human Capital at Deloitte Canada. Stephen, great to have you with us.
Hi, Amanda. Thanks for having me.
So we know that there were some changing expectations because of the pandemic, how much people want to be in the office, for instance, how much they value health benefits. What do you see as kind of the big trends that the younger generation of workers may not want to give up, that may not just be a pandemic thing, but that they'll hang on to?
Well, I've got so-so news for millennials. I've been at this for 20 years, so we've been talking exclusively almost about that generation and its impact on work. But now we have Gen Z entering the workforce. And they just had a unifying experience all around the world at the same time through the COVID pandemic. They saw work change fundamentally, and their expectations of work have also shifted fundamentally. But the first thing I'd mention is their number one concern today is actually about cost of living. 29% of Gen Z and 36% of millennials put that at the top of their list. But very much to your point, that's not the whole story. And almost counter to that, 40% of Gen Z and 24% of millennials would leave their job in the next 2 years if they could. And only a slightly smaller percentage would leave their job even if they didn't have another one lined up. I know those are the dark clouds, but to your point, the opportunity is, what are they shopping for? It's different than what it used to be. And employers really need to start to think about that.
So interesting, right? So obviously we hope that it's used as an opportunity. Are you starting to see Canadian businesses sort of saying we have to rethink how we connect with our employees? How do we distribute culture? Because if we're going to be remote, that's going to look different. Are you seeing innovation happening, or is there a bit of frozen in space saying, is this real? Do we really have to take these steps?
I can report that most Canadian employers are leaning heavily towards hybrid models. The challenge in the market today is nobody's really sure how to operate one well. Over the last 2 years, we've all become very good at task-based work. Endless Teams meetings, endless Zoom meetings, getting that checklist done every day, even at senior levels. And that sort of productivity trap, that task-based trap, follows us when we go back to the office. It makes it hard to work there. So there are some really design challenges about making work, especially for these younger generations. And most of that's about actually reframing work itself and thinking the dull and transactional that we used to get people to do as a rite of passage.
Right.
Does that really need to be part of work anymore? And can we make the experience quite different?
Well, not a ton of time here, Stephen, but Deloitte's led the way on thinking about productivity. Does all of this lead us to a better place? Do you expect it to make us more productive once we start working through some of these issues?
There's a vision just outside of reach of a Canada that better distributes employment from coast to coast to coast, because people are working hybrid, further from a geographic center, or remote. That's a really exciting economic outcome. So, my advice to employers would be drive through the pain, because we really could end up somewhere very positive on the other end of this change.
Stephen, it's so good to have you with us. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Stephen Harrington is Director of Human Capital at Deloitte Canada. Coming up, when a business can't find a human to do a job, they will often turn to automation, and that may be the post-pandemic trend that makes the most change in our labor force. That's still ahead. But first, this. When it comes to wooing young people to work for you, this one jumps out at us. How would you like to be the TikTok channel manager for giant oil company Shell? The posting says Shell wants to be one of the best content creators on TikTok, aimed at keeping Generation Z in the loop on its energy transition plans. Feels like a bit of a tall order to us, but maybe Shell will land a jaded millennial for this task. For some, it may sound like a dream job if they can stomach the content. We're back after this.